Hey baby, I hear the blues are calling. Tossed salads and scrambled eggs. And maybe I seem a bit confused. Yeah, maybe, but I got you pegged. Ha 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 ha. But I don't know what to do with those tossed salads and scrambled eggs. They're calling again. Yeah, so this riff on Frasier really means you're about to listen to another solo episode in my Rambling Reflections from the Road series. And this is the AI-generated voice of Mark Leslie Lefebvre, created from 11 Labs. In this episode, I'll be reflecting on three things: your value for librarians, my exhaustion, and what it is to be welcomed home. And that's coming up in episode 318 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 318 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and this is Rambling Reflections from the Road, Part 3. Oh, I almost tripped over my tongue on that alliteration, and that is because I am completely exhausted. So yes, if you haven't already guessed, this is going to be another solo episode, as I am neck deep, maybe eyeball deep, maybe creased wrinkles on my forehead deep in travel and so much extra work. But I want to get this episode out because I have been thinking and reflecting on three specific things that I'm going to cover in this episode. And of course, those three specific things will be followed by the bumpers, because you know how I like to play my bumpers and sound bits or whatever. So that's all coming up after this bumper. All right, so because this episode is a quick, down and dirty rambling reflections from the road, I'm going to forego the sponsor reading and say that this episode is sponsored by the awesome folks who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Thank you to my awesome patrons for sponsoring the podcast. I appreciate you supporting the podcast and hope you're taking advantage of the additional content that I post for patrons. And I do have a couple additional videos, etc., basically based on a keynote that I did recently as part of my recent travels, that I'm going to release exclusively for patrons because this particular keynote was an hour-long keynote that I had to dumb down to about 20 minutes. And so I was like, what do I do with the unabridged keynote? I know, I'll give it to my patrons so they can watch. And it's a video you can watch. I mean, you can listen to it, and maybe I'll do the audio only of it, but it is meant to be pushed out. So that'll be coming in the next couple weeks. And again, a huge thank you to all of those who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. And now, another bumper. Let's get into part one of this. Well, part three. This is part three of the Rambling Reflections, but there's three parts to it. So we'll call it part 3A, coming up right after this bumper. So I'm recording this from the Cleveland Hilton downtown, right, associated or attached to the convention center in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. It is only about a 5-hour drive from my home, but I'm here at Digipalooza, which is a conference hosted by the good folks at Overdrive. And the last in-person Digipalooza was actually 6 years ago, and I was actually at that one. Now, I was working for Kobo and Kobo Writing Life at the time, but now I'm, of course, working part-time for Draft to Digital, and I'm here as a representative of Draft to Digital to help librarians with the curation of indie author titles, but also to provide them with solutions. And so I'm here in Digipalooza and Overdrive. It's basically 3 days conference. It was Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and it is Friday, August 10th Thursday, August 10th, as I am recording this to get the episode out for the 10th/11th. And it is an absolutely powerful conference. So obviously Overdrive is one of the wholesalers. If you're familiar with the Libby app as a patron of a library, that's basically funneled by Overdrive. And of course, Draft to Digital has a partnership to provide ebooks to Overdrive. Findaway Voices will provide audiobooks to Overdrive. Overdrive is digital platform. And the Libby app, of course, is absolutely fantastic. You can have it on your phone, your tablet, your desktop, etc. Get access to all kinds of content. You can get books, magazines, music, newspapers, movies, etc. Now, obviously, we're in particular as authors, we're interested in ebooks and audiobooks that are in digital format. And so I'm here with Draft to Digital. I have a table in the vendor's room, and I've been talking to librarians. But the rambling reflection from the road for this particular one is just, okay, so I just finished. It's about 5:49 p.m. There is a bit of a break between the end of the conference sessions and celebratory sort of party, dinner, food, drinks, etc., etc. But I'm just overwhelmed with a couple things, and I wanted to share this with you guys. I was very interested in just how valuable indie authors can be for librarians. So I've talked to hundreds of librarians today. I've come through the table and talked about stuff. So what I've done, just to give you a breakdown, is I have a 36-page catalog that I've printed out, full color catalog, and what I've done is I've gone through a lot of the best-selling indie author titles for the past 6 months, kind of spotlight titles that have come out in July, coming out or have come out in August already, and are coming in September, October. These titles that were included were based on several reports and forms. So if you are an author who's using Draft to Digital and you filled out the promo form, and I'll have a link to the promo form in the show notes here at starkreflections.ca, went through the form that Megan and I look at to say, okay, who has titles that are coming out in the next little while, and do these authors publish to Overdrive through Draft to Digital? If that was the case, I extracted those titles out and used that as consideration to put in the catalog. Now, I couldn't put everything, so I was kind of going picking and choosing, looking for titles that, I'll be honest with you, judging you by the covers, looking at really, really good covers, looking at track record. Okay, these are titles that have done well historically. Libraries tend to like these authors, these titles. What are the forthcoming titles, or even ones that what looks so great? And one of the things we even have in the catalog is Megan has selected some titles that she thinks are absolutely amazing. They maybe haven't necessarily sold much yet, but we'd love to spotlight these authors. So we have this catalog. We're giving out the catalog. I've printed 500 of them, and it's basically a sales catalog, not all that different than the sales catalogs I used to get pitched to from publishers when I was a bookseller and I was looking to buy books for my store. Because as a bookseller who used to be pitched, I kind of know what goes into those pitches. So I've put those catalogs together. Again, this is just free marketing for authors who are using Draft to Digital to get into Overdrive. So we've got the catalog, but in the catalog as well, we're reminding librarians of some of the things. What can we do to help you curate titles? And so here's the thing that blew my mind as well. So librarians were very excited to see, well, what's coming out from indie authors? What it might be, for authors or patrons who like this kind of book. They're looking for this kind of romance, or this kind of cozy mystery, or this kind of thriller, or these kinds of nonfiction books. What can we help them find that are going to be way more affordable than they can get from some of the larger publishers? So they were excited about that. They're always excited about discovering new authors, but they're also excited about discovering authors who are in their region. So authors from their city, authors from their county, authors from their state. And that was one of the first things. So as an author, as you're listening to this, what I want you to take away from this is, if you are published wide and you have not reached out to your local library and let them know that you're a local author, whether you're traditionally published, if you're indie published, whatever, to let them know that you have works available. Yeah, librarians are mostly interested in frontlist, but they're also really passionate about curating and supporting local authors. A couple things you can do is don't just come to the library with, hey, buy my books, bring my books into your store. you can offer them content. You can offer them value and perspective. So, for example, I write true ghost story books. I can go into the library, particularly around Halloween, and offer to do talks about ghosts and ghost stories and local ghost lore and how to write a ghost story book as well. Because I'm bringing them content, and usually in exchange for bringing them free content that can bring patrons in and provide them value, then they'll often look at, well, what books does Mark have available in print, in audiobook, in ebook format, and they usually support me on that other end to make my books available, particularly for the patrons who come in and say, wow, this guy's interesting, let's check out his books. But here's the other thing that was just amazing is when librarians found out that we have a free self-publishing platform in Draft to Digital, they're just eager to, how can I get information about how to help patrons? Because librarians are constantly having local authors come in who don't know the options available to them. And one of the biggest fears I have is when authors don't know what's available to them, that's where they can sometimes fall prey to some of the predators out there who will charge them tens of thousands of dollars and marketing packages they do not need at all. So we can offer them solutions. You, as a local author who maybe if you are familiar with self-publishing, I mean, obviously if you're listening to the Stark Reflections podcast, you're somewhat either already familiar with this world or you're open-minded and willing to learn about traditional publishing and self-publishing and all the opportunities that exist for you. You, as a listener of this podcast, probably have a lot of perspective that you can turn around and share with your local library, creating a friendship, creating a partnership with the local librarians. Because just even if, again, I've been in the industry for decades and decades, and I'm still going back to school to learn, there's always something for all of us to learn. So even if you don't feel that you know a lot, I bet you do know a lot. You're attending to a lot. You're learning a lot. You're able to take some of that learning and use it to pay it forward and help other authors in your local community. And you can help your library with that as well. And if you've reached out and maybe at one branch of the library, maybe you got the wrong librarian on the wrong day and they were having a horrible day and they weren't in the mood for it, it's okay to try again. Rejection is a huge part of traditional publishing, even self-publishing. Rejection in the form of no one's buying my book or they gave me a 1-star review. But, going back and giving it another shot, because I'll be honest with you, the look of enthusiasm and passion and excitement that these librarians, now obviously these are exceptional librarians because they've taken the time to come to a conference like this to find new material, to find new content. So obviously they're the creme de la creme. But every library has those people. Every bookstore has those people. And I think it would be a wonderful opportunity if you're willing to stick your neck out just a little bit to offer them those opportunities. Just even coming in and saying, hey, I'm familiar enough with the landscape, I can come and talk to other authors about the things I know. Because I bet you, dear listener, probably know a lot more than you believe you know. And you can use that to help local authors. You can use that to help local libraries. So that's the end of the first part of this rambling reflection. But as I come back from, listening to the librarians, talking to them about the curation they're interested in, they're absolutely starving for really good information, for really good opportunities so that they can help their local communities. So think about the ways that you can help those librarians and libraries. I've often said to authors, ask not what your library can do for you, ask what you can do for your library. And I bet you there's some mutual benefits that you can participate in. So that's the end of the first reflection. Cue the bumper so I can take a bit of a breath. Okay, the second reflection here, ironically, is about taking a breath. The second reflection is just how bloody exhausted I am. I am absolutely overwhelmed. I'm absolutely exhausted. I am ready to collapse. I'm somewhat running on adrenaline here, and I'm running on the adrenaline of the passion of being with so many cool bookish peeps here at Digipalooza. Now, I have been traveling for weeks and weeks I was at the Masters of Publishing program. I mean, after previous travel for personal reasons, camping, of course, personal reasons with the house that I own up north, and then going to the Masters of Publishing program at Western Colorado University, which was absolutely fantastic. I basically left the last day of that to go to Calgary, to go to When Words Collide. I'll talk a little bit more about that up in Calgary, Alberta. Spend several days with authors there. I basically got home Monday night, this past Monday night. Liz picked me up at the airport. We had Monday evening together. I had Tuesday where I actually had to go and pick up the catalogs for this. That Liz and I at least had some time. I got some work done in the morning. Liz and I helped her daughter move. She was basically moving from one place to another, so I spent a few hours doing that. We then at least had a chance to have dinner together after running an errand. And then first thing in the morning, I'm up bright and early, getting up at 6 in the morning, hit the road before 7 to drive 5 hours to Cleveland, Ohio, just across the border, Ontario through New York State, Pennsylvania, then into Ohio. And I've been going nonstop. And when I leave here late Friday, I'm finally going to get home. I'm finally going to have some time where I'm not overpacked. But I've been thinking about this. I was sitting there earlier this afternoon, and when there was a quiet moment, when there were people there, I'm jazzed, I'm energized, I'm talking to people, it's great. But when I sit down, I'm wiped, I'm exhausted, I'm ready to cry, I'm ready to collapse, I'm ready to just sleep right on the spot. And the feeling of overwhelm that I have taken on so much. Obviously, I've got the Masters of Publishing, I've got all these speaking engagements, I've got the work that I'm doing ongoing with Draft to Digital, which is, interacting with authors. I'm doing work with Wide for the Win, with the LLC that we formed there, with the board of directors that we have. I'm doing work with other authors where I'm publishing their works, and I'm laying books out, and I've got so many different projects on the go just for Stark Publishing, just for those authors. And then I've got the books that I need to write, the books that I need to release, the books that I need to go back and make updates to, the projects, the future novels that I'm working on. I realized this afternoon when I was sitting there and just making notes for this podcast that, oh my God, it's Thursday. I've got to get a podcast episode out because I made a commitment to you, dear listener, that I would not miss a single week of this podcast, and I want to get this out. But I was looking at it and I was thinking, I've gotten to a point where I have taken on too much. And I know a few episodes back I talked about taking a break and stuff like that. And so I'm not going to go out and take a full break. I'm probably going to jam as much relaxing as I can into a single half day so I can get more work done. Because if I take too much of a break, I'm going to fall behind and I will never get caught up, and that would just be disastrous. But what can I do? What are those things that I can do to take a bit of a breath and make sure I don't, because I think the biggest thing that would hurt me, would frustrate me, is letting people down, is letting down those people that I'm working with, that I want to help and I want to prop up and I want to support. That is what motivates me. I'm motivated as a storyteller. I'm motivated as somebody who loves to inspire other people, but I'm also motivated in providing value out there, whether it's as a writer, whether it's as an industry representative, etc. And I want to make sure that I'm not letting people down. And so when I get overwhelmed, when earlier today when I was just thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get all this done? I realized I need to take a breath. I need to list things out, look at what I need to do, and look at how can I get this done in a way that is not going to shortchange any of the promises that I've made for myself, to the people that are important to me in my life, and of course to all of the awesome people that I'm lucky enough that I get to work with. So that's something that I was feeling really overwhelmed about 4 hours ago. Just completely, not nervous breakdown level, but pretty much freaking out and kind of shaking internally. And as I began to start to process this, because I was thinking about how I was going to tackle things, the processing of it over time has helped me to sort of come to terms with it. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to get overwhelmed again. It's not going to mean that I'm not going to have some panic attacks. or panic episodes, but recognizing that there's the ebbs and flows of those things. But I just think recognizing when I've painted myself into a corner, recognizing the exhaustion, and trying to think about, even if there are little micro things that I can do to help myself with that. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to panic again. I'm going to go through it, but I'm going to realize that at the end of the day, it'll all fall into place. And if I stumble along the way, I know that there are good people who will have my back and who will support me and who will understand, because they too, you too, are perhaps overwhelmed about a whole bunch of things. So I embrace the overwhelm. I ride the overwhelm, and I take that as a natural part of the ebbs and flows of the things that I do. Because in some cases, I would rather be overwhelmed than underwhelmed. I'd rather have a little bit too much on my plate than have nothing to do. I ran into that problem when I started to earn more as a writer, and I was looking at wanting to leave the corporate world so I could write full time. I had too much free time on my hands, and with too much free time on my hands, I did SFA. I did absolutely nothing, but watch cat videos online. So, working 20 hours a week part-time for Draft to Digital has been one of the most productive things I've done for my writing, because it meant, I've got the podcast, I got Draft to Digital. That means I have limited time for my writing. Therefore, with limited time, I do much, much better, because I don't think I have all the time in the world. It reminds me of, the tortoise and the hare. The hare thought, oh, great, I'm a fast runner. I have all the time in the world. I can goof off. And look what happens. Slow and steady wins the race, as opposed to the person who thinks they have all the time in the world and wastes all of it. So again, that's the second bit of Rambling Reflections. I'm going to take one more deep breath, allow the bumper to play, and I get into the third bit of this part 3 of the Rambling Reflections from the Road. So as I mentioned, I've been overwhelmed. As I mentioned, there's a lot on my plate, and I was already emotionally and physically exhausted from a fantastic week at Western Colorado University. I was energized and excited, but I was also pretty exhausted. When I was flying to Calgary, it was a long day. I had to drive 4 hours from Gunnison to Denver. I had to wait at the airport. Went to Calgary. I got picked up by a good friend, Sarah, who met me at the airport, and we got into When Words Collide, which is a fantastic conference. Now, I thought it was going to be the very last When Words Collide, but it was the last When Words Collide with Randy McCharles as the chair and that volunteer board, but it's being handed over to a completely different group. So even though it's the end of that era, phase 1 of When Words Collide, there's a new phase of When Words Collide that's going to continue next August in 2024 with a new group. And I think it'll have a lot of the same volunteers and a lot of the same people who attend it. So it should have very similar feel to what I get. And that's what I want to get at, because on my way to Calgary that Friday, I was second guessing myself, and I was saying, Mark, why'd you do this? Why did you add this to your, to your plate? You're exhausted. You don't need to be there. You can you should have canceled. You should have not done this. And I was feeling like, yeah, I'm going to go there. I'm just going to kind of go through the motions and just make my way through it. But Sarah picked me up at the airport. I hadn't seen her in person since before the pandemic, and that was invigorating. And then I got to see Chris Humphreys and Rob Sawyer and James Fell. I got to actually, I've been working with James Fell, self-published, traditionally published author who decided to self-publish over the pandemic. He hired me. He's actually my most successful client. Self-published 2 amazing books that he sold more than 52,000 copies of on This Day in History Shit Went Down. And then just signed a land-breaking deal with Penguin Random House to republish those 2 self-published books. So getting a chance to hang out with James Fell in person, what a wonderful guy. Fantastic. He wrote the intro to my book, Yippee-Ki-Yay, Mother Bleeper. And we got to meet in person for the first time. So it was so cool. And then later that evening, Chris Humphreys and I were sharing a craft beer. That's how we bonded when we first met at When Words Collide years ago. And we were just talking about, business stuff together and getting caught up because we hadn't seen each other in person in a while. We're sitting at the bar, and Susie Vidori, author that I know who's been involved with When Words Collide for years, a good friend, loves Susie. Susie comes up to me and says, "Welcome home." And I almost broke down and cried when she said that, because that's exactly what it felt like. I was home with people I respected and admired and trusted and valued. I love spending time with these people. And on my way there, I was being negative, and I was thinking, well, why am I doing this? What am I doing there? But when Susie said that, it drove it all home. All the interactions I'd had since I got there were absolutely fantastic. They were phenomenal. They were energizing. And when she said that, I felt that warmth. I felt that's the reason why I go to these events. That's the reason why I go to When Words Collide. That's the reason why I'm at Digipalooza. That's why I'm in the Masters of Publishing program. It's why I do Superstars writing seminars, and why I go to 20 books to 50K. Because I get energized off of fellow creatives. I get energized off of fellow book nerds, fellow book lovers, fellow readers, fellow authors, fellow creatives. It energizes me. While the same time, that energy I expend drains me, but it feeds back into me. And so, yes, as an omnivert, as somebody who actually is relatively shy, and I was feeling it last night at the reception where, I'd gone up to people, strangers I didn't know, and very, very uncomfortable, and I'm not good at this at all. I'm way better when people approach me. But I reached out and met some new people and just asked about them, learned a little bit about where they were from, made some new friendships and stuff, but it was very, very exhausting. I actually ended up calling it quits relatively early, so I could just come back to the hotel room, watch something on Netflix, have a couple beers, and just chill. But I'm ready to go back out and socialize again, because I ended up engaging with so many people today and having wonderful conversations. But it reminded me that even in those moments of exhaustion, I can be empowered, I can be energized by the passion of fellow book lovers, the passion of fellow authors. And that can feed me. That can help keep me going. Yeah, I am exhausted. Yeah, I can't wait to get home tomorrow late at night. I'm going to be so excited to just collapse and potentially try to sleep in on Saturday for the first time in weeks. But I think in the moment of enjoying it, I want to soak in it. I want to absorb what I can, and I want to remember that for the next time I get to the point where I feel, why am I doing this? Why am I going there? I want to remind myself of Susie saying, "Welcome home," and how that just drove everything. It drove everything home for me in such a powerful way. So I'm not really sure if these rambling reflections were valuable for you. Maybe it was just therapy for me. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to share where I was. I wanted to share as authentically as I could where I am, the scattered way that I'm feeling right now, of the highs and the lows, all happening almost simultaneously. And just share that with you in the hopes that if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling that there's too much on your plate, that you realize that you're not alone. And it's okay. It's okay to take a pause. It's okay to take a breath. It's okay to say, no, this is too much for me. And it's okay to feel both things. It's okay to feel energized and exhausted at the same time. There's no right way. There's no one way. There's the way that works for you. And so I hope in this hopefully last part of my summer rambling reflections from the road, I hope you found at least one or two little nuggets that can be valuable for you as you craft, as you create, as you design your own unique author journey to long-term success as a writer. and as a publishing professional, because truly that is what we are, regardless of what path we take as writers. We are publishing professionals. So that's it for episode 318 of the Stark Reflections podcast. I appreciate you. If you're still listening to this rambling, if you're still listening to the episode, thank you so much. Thank you to all of my longtime listeners. If you're a new listener, most of the episodes have a little bit more, what do you call it, when they're actually outlined with segments and things like that, where there's actually an interview with someone really, truly fascinating that I love chatting with. I've got several more interviews in the can coming out, but it does take a lot of energy and a lot of effort to produce those episodes, and I just didn't have time to go through and re-edit the interviews to make myself and my interviewee sound way smarter in the show notes and all the things that go into it. So thanks for your patience with me as I finish up these rambling reflections from the road, tongue twisters that they can be, especially when I'm exhausted. But thanks again for listening, and welcome if you're a new listener. If you want to support the podcast, of course, there is patreon.com/starkreflections, but one of the best ways you can support me is by listening to the episodes and, better yet, sharing the podcast with people that you think might find value. And so, until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com. Marco has left the building.